I remember early during his time as Pope, perhaps the first Sunday after his election, actually, in one of his Sunday Angelus addresses, Pope Francis used a line that I have borrowed and used several times myself. God never gets tired of forgiving us. It's we who get tired of asking for forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness and mercy has indeed been a huge part of the pontificate of Pope Francis. Similar to the line I just mentioned, he has made other comments along the way about mercy during the almost 12 years that he's been Pope. 2 years after his 2013 election, he even proclaimed a special Jubilee Year of Mercy that took place in the year 2016. Now, it's not my intention today to sort of eulogize Pope Francis. After all, he is still very much alive, even if it now appears that his time on earth may not last much longer. At the same time, as I read about his hospitalization and the various health updates that don't look so encouraging right now, I can't help but think about him and his ministry when I hear this in the gospel reading today. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Those words are certainly some that have guided his approach to speaking about mercy and forgiveness, words that certainly moved him to do something like that Jubilee Year of Mercy that I mentioned. When Jesus speaks about forgiveness, it's important for us to remember that he did not simply mean forgiveness for those whom we get along with, those whom we can count on to forgive us in return, or those who sympathize with us, or we can sympathize with them. He says, "For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you?" Instead of a transactional forgiveness directed toward receiving something else, instead of giving forgiveness with the idea that I will get something back from that person, Jesus speaks about forgiveness as a practice we need to extend for our own good, not just for the good of the person being forgiven. In fact, if you think in your own life, you may recognize various times when forgiving someone else has helped you to move forward with the situation far more than it's helped them. And that is simply part of how that process can play out. It is spiritually healthy for us to forgive the one who has hurt us. And if we want God to forgive us, if we must rely on his mercy, well, consistency demands that we must also be ready to forgive those who have hurt us in some way. In speaking this way of loving one's enemies and being always ready to forgive, Jesus was, of course, saying something very challenging. It's almost certain that a large number of people would have thought that forgiveness was something one should give only to a loved one, or perhaps in some sort of transaction. I forgive you for this if you do for me another favor that I need. That attitude is not simply an ancient one. Many people today believe the same, even if it's not something they would necessarily say out loud. So often do we think, if I'm going to forgive, I want something back in return. But that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's saying forgive because it's ultimately good for us, being the forgivers in the process. Even as difficult as this teaching of Jesus was and still is, it does have its roots in the Old Testament as well. We can think, first of all, of the various ways that God himself offers forgiveness to his people, despite the frequent episodes of their turning away from him. We can also see mercy and forgiveness practiced in some of the Old Testament accounts within ancient Israel as the people dealt with one another. Our first reading today is a good example. Saul has been pursuing David and has tried to kill David already. Now David has an opportunity to kill Saul in his sleep. But David decides not to kill him. Saul is still the king after all, and David chooses not to kill him since the king of Israel is also God's anointed one. Any honest look at our own lives will reveal that we are indeed sinners, that we do, in fact, need God's forgiveness. It's important that we seek that forgiveness regularly in prayer and especially in the sacrament of reconciliation. In recognizing that great gift, we also see our need to be forgiving persons. As we seek to forgive, we can look to God's great example, since He never gets tired of forgiving, even if we sometimes get tired of asking for forgiveness.